What's up, y'all, and welcome to the Azariah Podcast. I'm Pedro. This show is about real people and their stories. Stories and experiences that shape you up and change you. We talk to people from all walks of life to hear their journeys, challenges, and what drives them. Coming to you from the Wolf Media Studio. Today, we're sitting down with Kelvin Goertzen. He presents Steinbach and Manitoba legislature since 2003 and has served as Manitoba's 23rd Premier, along with senior cabinet roles including Health, Education, and Justice Minister. Kelvin, thank you so much for agreeing to be on here. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for the invitation. It's good to be in your studio and in Kleefeld, which I represented for many years until there was redistribution, but love the community and I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I was disappointed when I saw it got redrawn and changed.
Yeah, I was too, and it's a process people don't always understand. It kind of happens every 10 years, and in a riding like this where there's lots of population growth, it tends to shrink then the area because you're only kind of allowed to represent 22 or 23,000 people. And so I would have been happy to keep Kleefeld and Grunthal and Niverville and other communities I represented, but as the area grows, you just sort of see more and more there's a shrinking of the ridings, and it adds ridings too.
I didn't know that. That's an interesting fact to have. Growing up in Steinbach, what was that like?
Well, if you mean like Steinbach, the community itself, very different than it is now, right? I mean, Steinbach is so multicultural now, and I often say that for my son Malachi, it's such a enriching experience for him because he's had friends growing up from all over the world, really, who've come to Steinbach. I didn't have that same sort of enrichment. If I wanted to see the world, I had to get onto a plane and see the world. The world's really come to Steinbach. So that's changed a lot in terms of the community. So Steinbach was smaller. Obviously, there was less services and less amenities, but I liked growing up in Steinbach. It felt like a safe community. And a lot of these things you don't think of when you're young, right? And going to Elmdale Elementary School or the junior high, you don't know any other community other than the one you've grown up in if you haven't been anywhere else, and I hadn't. So it felt like a safe community. I think largely it was a safe community, but not as diverse or as culturally rich as it is today. And I think it's good that it's changed.
Okay. So you were born in the Steinbach area?
Born in Steinbach, lived in that area my whole life, mostly. We spent 1 year in Winnipeg. My dad died when I was quite young. I was 11 years old when he passed away. He was an alcoholic, died from the disease essentially, byproduct of being an alcoholic. So we moved around a lot. He was a truck driver. I know you have some connection to that industry. And being an alcoholic truck driver isn't a great success. And so lots of financial struggles. We moved around probably once every 6 months to a year we moved. Even though we were always in Steinbach, we were moving an awful lot, lots of sort of challenges within the family. And then of course when he passed away, there was even more challenges for my mom, who was a single mother and raised us, my sister and I, as a single mother. So we moved into government housing, actually in Steinbach, because that's what we could afford, and we were lucky. I mean, again, I'm 11 years old, so I wasn't thinking a lot about how it was working. That was an onus my mom had to bear. But we were lucky to have those sort of supports, that government housing and other supports were there. It's one of the reasons I got involved in the food bank when I was a bit older, because I wanted to help others who found themselves into situations that really weren't of their own making, but they needed support and they needed help. And that was our life growing up in Steinbach. So a little chaotic, right, because of the family displacement, because of my dad dying when I was young, because of alcoholism in the family. But my mom made it a secure and a stable environment as possible. And the community helped too, because it was a safe community.
Okay. So what role did the community play in your upbringing?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's hard sometimes to look back, right? But when I was involved in the justice file, I would often say that my experience led me to believe that having, a trusted adult in your life, whether it's your parent or somebody else, would obviously be best if it's your parent, but that's not always the case for everybody. Trusted adult in your life is really, really important. Having a safe environment around you, having supports where you need them, because that was my experience. I mean, Dad died when I was 11, as I mentioned, alcoholic family, grew up in government housing. Statistically, if I look back, at statistics, I was far more likely to end up, in trouble with the law and in other places than in the Premier's office many years later. So what really helped me was, again, my mom, our community, supports that were there from government, and a little bit of luck along the way, because there was people who came along and offered me opportunities that ultimately were helpful. Jim Penner, I would name, is one of them, who used to own a store called Penner Foods, and some of your listeners will remember Penner Foods, depending how old they are. But I got a job there when I was 16, and it was really transformative for me, because suddenly I was making my own income. He paid a little bit higher than the industry average, because that was the nature of who Jim Penner was. Gave me other opportunities. Eventually it led me to university. So I credit someone like Jim, who didn't know me personally at the time. I got to know him later in his life, but didn't know me personally at the time. But he ran a company in a faith-filled way, gave back to the community, gave back to his employees, and it really had an impact on my life.
That's amazing. Yeah, I heard his name before, and like just in random conversations with people that've been in the area for a long time. So it kind of like from that angle and that perspective that you were.
Yeah, I think about. if you talk to almost anybody who knew Jim, they would tell you he was a great business person, but a great person. And even if they didn't know him personally, just working at the store, you could tell his values, like because of the values of the store and the employees, and how satisfied they were when working in the store. And people would say it was a special place to work, special place to shop, and that was because of Jim and his wife Bev and others in the family as well. So Jim's been gone more than 20 years now. I still miss him, but credit him with a lot of my ability to get out of sort of difficult circumstances when I was younger by offering good employment.
That's amazing to hear. So your personal family, how did that start?
Like my family with my son and my wife, or yeah. So my wife Kim and I, we've been married for, I'm going to say 26 or 27 years. Actually, maybe 27 or 28 years. She's going to be listening to this and going, how can you not know how many years we're married? But it's somewhere around 27 or 28 years. We actually met at church. We were in a youth group in Steinbach. Not maybe an unfamiliar story for people who grew up in Steinbach. And it was a relatively small youth group, but we met there and got married at that time. I don't think she knew I was involved in politics already at that time on a volunteer basis and that, but my goal was to be a lawyer. So I don't know if she knew she was getting into a place where there'd be elected life in the future, but she certainly knew my interest and involvement in politics. Our son Malachi came along a number of years later. We had a very difficult time having children. We experienced lots of miscarriages along the way, a lot of heartache that way, and I feel for a lot of people who go through those things. And we recognized and realized when it became more public that we were having a struggle having our son Malachi, having any children, having miscarriages, that there's so many people who suffer that way, and it's hard. And the longing to have a child is so strong for people. And when you're having miscarriages, or if you can't have children, it's incredibly difficult and heart-wrenching. So we have a heart for people like that. We've spoken about that publicly before. My wife has spoken at events about that, events that celebrate life. And we're blessed that we had Malachi. We named him Malachi after the Hebrew word Malachi, the last book in the Old Testament, because in Hebrew it means messenger of God, and for us, he was a message from God, a fulfillment of our longing for a child. We're very blessed to have him.
That's awesome. When did your interest in politics start? What was that journey like?
So I think it probably started less with politics and more just with public affairs. So I mentioned that my dad died when I was young, and part of that is a bit of isolation, right? Like, I wouldn't want to say that I didn't have friends. I did have friends, but there was a loneliness there, right? By losing my dad when I was young, and one of the things that I did at that time, if your listeners are young enough, they'll remember like something called AM radio. And I used to listen to AM radio, and I would listen to somebody named Larry King, who later became famous on CNN with the Larry King talk show. But he did radio before he was on television. And I could get sometimes, if the radio waves were right and the radio gods were friendly, I could get the radio feed of Larry King out of Minneapolis, because the frequency waves with AM bounce, right? Yeah. Up and down as opposed to FM. And so I would listen to Larry King often late at night because I was lonely, and it was kind of something I would help at night to listen to. And he was often interviewing people from around the world, and I became very interested in world affairs through that and through other listening to the media that I could find back then. It was very different, of course, than it is today. We get media at your fingertips from anywhere around the world. and became interested in world affairs, which ultimately led, I think, kind of when I was in high school, to becoming more interested in political affairs. There was a natural connection, of course. And somebody introduced me to the Reform Party of Canada at that time, which was led by Preston Manning, who ultimately became the leader of the opposition in the federal parliament. Got a chance to meet Mr. Manning several times and volunteer for the Reform Party on national conventions that were happening in Winnipeg, and other events were happening in other places. And that really was how I kind of got interested in politics. And then at some point during my university career, I was walking through the tier building of the university campus. For those who go to the University of Manitoba, they'll recognize the tier building, a big building in the center of campus. And there was an advertisement for the legislative internship program at the Manitoba legislature. I kind of looked at that and thought, well, that seems interesting. Didn't know if I'd be a fit or not, but applied for it, got accepted into the internship program, got assigned to the Progressive Conservative Caucus. Gary Filmon was the premier at that time. And I started as an intern in the legislature. I think I'm the only intern who ever ultimately became premier, but it was, a way to get into it for me. I didn't come from a political family, didn't have any political connections really, and it was a way for me to sort of get in and prove myself. And at different times in my life, I've been in the legislature now, either as a staff person or elected, on and off for a pretty long time now.
Okay. So you have a law degree, right? I
do, yeah. And so that was actually my goal, was to go into law. I love the law. I still love the law. And it was my desire to be a lawyer. What happened was I'd been hired by a law firm in Winnipeg, was just starting that process when Jim Penner, I mentioned Jim Penner as being the owner of Penner Foods, but he was also the former MLA. My predecessor, he was the MLA for Steinbach before I became MLA. He was diagnosed a couple of days into the election campaign of 2003 with terminal cancer. And he chose to step out of the race at that time. And again, we were in a campaign, or nearly in a campaign, and we had to make a quick decision. The party asked, if I'd be interested in running. They knew I was just starting my political career. I mentioned I'd been an intern there before. I'd worked there in the Filmon government then after I was an intern, so I was known that way. Essentially, we had 24 hours to make a decision whether or not we were going to enter politics and really radically change the direction of our life. We prayed a lot about it, in much as you can in 24 hours. And we decided that we felt this was something that God would want us to do, my wife and I. So that's why we chose to do it. But it was a hard decision because I'd spent a lot of time and money getting ready to be a lawyer. And so it was tough to leave that, and I enjoyed it, and it would have been a satisfying career too. I do remember talking to one of the lead lawyers at the firm that I was at and telling him about my dilemma and that I had to make this decision. And he said to me, well, it's a tough decision, but you're lucky because you're choosing between two things that you love. Politics and the law, and you're going to have regret no matter which one you choose. So you need to choose, and you shouldn't feel too upset about it, because you get to choose between two things you love, and not everybody gets to do that.
Yeah.
And that was true. I was actually very lucky that way. But I have regret about not having stayed in law longer, and had I gone into law, I would have had regret about not going into politics, I'm sure. But we felt called to do it, and I don't think, looking back 23 years later, I think it was the right decision, and we were called to the right place.
So you were elected the youngest MLA at age 33.
Youngest MLA for this constituency, not the youngest MLA ever.
Okay.
There would have been younger elected in other ridings, but rural ridings tend to elect people who are a little bit older for whatever reason. That might be changing now too, as politics changes a little bit. But I was the youngest for this constituency. I think I think we'd say a country mile in our in our terminology. I don't think anybody had been elected in their 30s that I'm aware of, anyway.
So what was that like when you first got in?
It was a change, right? Because I was 33. My wife was 29. Like we were pretty young, right? And suddenly you're in the public eye. It's different representing a rural riding than a Winnipeg riding, I think, because you are more known in a rural riding. You're more in the community. you're shopping in a store where most of your constituents are shopping in, right? There's a greater connection, I think, for MLAs who are in rural ridings and in Winnipeg ridings, where, you could have people from all over the city who are coming to a particular store. So it was a change because suddenly, like, we were in a bit of a spotlight, and it was probably more of an adjustment for Kim, for my wife, because we both were fairly young, right? And there's an expectation of how you're going to act and how you're going to dress and all those sort of things, right? So we were mindful of that. I don't think it changed a great deal of how we were as people, but it did change, our life significantly and very quickly, because the decision came up so quickly and it was so different than what we were planning to do. But I look back at it and I go, not only do I think that because we were called to it, I think God doesn't, lead you to something if He's not going to help lead you through it. So there was that. We had that for sure. Lots of people said they were praying for us. Remarkable thing about this area. I still get that. I still hear people say that. A couple of days ago, somebody comes up to me and says, "I've got your picture on your fridge. We're praying for you." And that's been so meaningful over the years. So looking back, it was an exciting time, right? But a change for sure. Yeah.
Did your perspective of what you thought politics would be like change? From starting to a little time in.
So because I was in politics, first as an intern and volunteering with the Reform Party, as I mentioned, and then working a little bit in the film and government after I was an intern, I kind of knew I knew where the bathrooms were, right, when I got elected, which a lot of people don't, right, in this big building. And, and that helps, in terms of knowing the rhythm of the building and the people who were there, right? All of that was helpful. So question period is an example, which is an entirely different beast than anything else. So it helped to have that sort of experience, so it wasn't shocking. But being a public representative is different until you get into it. You don't quite know for sure, right? How people react to you, you have to realize your words mean more in a community. You can be casually talking to somebody and things you'd say when you're not elected, you don't really think much of it. All of a sudden you're elected and it circles around the community, it comes back to you and you go, somebody said that you said this, and often it comes back and it's something very different than you said. But you recognize it, that what you're saying does have more importance sometimes to people. And so you have to be mindful of that, right? Which is good. I mean, we should all be mindful of what we say anyway.
Yes.
But it was a good reminder of that for sure. Over the years, I've seen a significant change in politics. It's become much more toxic, much more bitter, much more attack-orientated. Now, politics has never been for the faint of heart. It's always been rough and tumble, don't get me wrong. But the kind of attacks that I see, the personal attacks in politics, has changed significantly in 20 years. It used to be you could have a pretty strong debate in question period. Gary Dewar and I, as an example, and then we would chat as we were in the hallway, leaving question period, and we'd talk a bit about the family and that kind of stuff. And that doesn't happen much anymore. And I think that's really too bad because of the nature of the attacks. It's one thing to be upset or disagree with somebody about their policy. That's actually what politics is for, to have disagreement about politics. But when you personally attack their morality, their ethics, their whatever, right? Call them bigots, or all the other sort of things that happen on a daily basis in politics. It is almost impossible to have those conversations after. And that's what's changed. And I think it's changed for the worse, because regardless if you disagree with somebody, you should be able to have those discussions, because those discussions usually lead you to a better landing place in terms of decisions, but they open your eyes too. I mean, I don't think I've ever talked to somebody where we had a disagreement where I didn't at least get a sense of from their perspective of why they felt the way they did. And even that's helpful, right? Just knowing why somebody's coming from the position they're coming from. Even if you don't agree or never end up agreeing, it gives you a better understanding of where they're coming from. And I think it helps you appreciate that person more too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was my next idea. Yeah. Like the difference in politics, the approach that they take now, and like you said, insults and all that, like how politics has changed over the years. And what's your take on how the evolution of social media has played a huge role over the last 10 years or so in politics? I think there's been an ebb and flow to it. So there's no question that if you can say terrible things about a person anonymously,
sadly, human nature is you're more likely to do that than you would to their face.
Yes.
The kinds of things that I'll read about on somebody know or not, say on social media, they almost would never say to a person directly. And so that not just anonymity, but that remoteness, right, I think is been a negative, where people can judge people or, sort of just jump on, attack, and leave without any sort of interaction with a person. They're far more likely to do it on social media because they're at a distance, or sometimes they're just anonymous, and then people are really sometimes likely to do it. So that's negative, right? Because anytime you're losing, I think, that personal interaction, you're losing the sense of a person and losing the ability to understand their perspective too, which is really, really important. But I also think it's changing a bit. Like, social media, when it was still called Twitter a number of years ago, now it's X, and it was still called Twitter then, it had more of a gravitas to it, and people saw more importance in it. And even whether it was the media or politicians, I think they saw more importance than now. I think it's sort of trying to change the other way, where a lot of people are discounting the things they hear on social media. They assume that it's AI, or maybe it's not right, or they don't trust it, or it's an anonymous person or a bot, right? So where there used to be more weight given to social media even 5 or 6 years ago, I actually think it's changing now. And I think you're going to see that with campaigns too, where election campaigns are less driven on social media and
really?
I think they will be less driven on social media, maybe more driven to podcasts and advertising on podcasts, right, where people are listening and they're not quite as inflamed by things and maybe feel more inclined to listen to what's going on. A lot of people now, they're going onto social media and they're going, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's AI.
Right.
I don't know, and so as people lose trust in a platform, it becomes less valuable for campaigns and that sort of thing too. So I do think there's a shift happening there too. And if you look at where last campaigns, federally and otherwise, have spent a lot of their funds and money, a lot of it wasn't on social media. It's always going to be some for sure. But it was different platforms, and some of it was advertised. A lot of it was advertising on podcasts, where you could reach people in a way where they didn't assume that the information was wrong or generated by a bot or generated by AI.
Yeah. Well, they would listen. They had each podcast cast, I guess, have their listeners, and their listeners generally trust the host, right? So
that's right. And that information is available. You can. I mean, this happened in American politics years ago, where campaigns would figure out who was subscribing to fishing and hunting magazines and go, well, they're probably more likely going to be our supporters. So they would buy the list of subscribers and target them directly, right, for campaigns, because there was a correlation between people who were buying those magazines and voting for certain political parties. So that's true for podcasts or other sort of productions too, where people go, okay, it's more likely that women or men or whomever are going to be in certain age groups, certain demographics, certain locations are going to listen to these sort of things, and then they're targeting that specifically. So there is a loss of influence with social media. It's not, I'm not saying it's gone or that there isn't importance to it, but it's not what it was 5 years ago either.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that you still see quite a bit, I think our previous prime minister kind of started it, where they would kind of talk to their own people directly on social media, right? That kind of gives you, you can just give so-called casual updates, right?
TikTok, or those sort of things have importance because you can directly see somebody. But even there, I think you're seeing people platform in different ways, right? And try to get that message out to people in different ways as people withdraw from certain media platforms. Yeah. So, there's been, I don't know what the numbers are for X anymore, but I certainly know people who've left the platform, right? Or with Facebook, where they're ensuring that it's just sort of family and friends, right? It's also an older demographic, and they're often just sort of checking in on their kids or whatever, right? Or they have family who are traveling or studying abroad, and so they keep a track that way, right? The nature of these platforms has changed. There was a sense of gravitas to it when a lot of them started up, that, oh my goodness, something was on Twitter, this is really important, it's breaking, right? A lot of that's been diminished because people just don't know, where's it coming from, who's doing it, what's the motivation, right? There's a trust factor there.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to see how that progresses, or how that evolves over time. Like if it will come back in a way, or is it just kind of going to start heading in a completely different
It's the
direction?
biggest question for our time. How do people trust what they see, right? Because it used to be, there was innate trust for a lot of things. Then you started to become a little suspicious about what you're reading. Now you're not even sure if you can trust what you're seeing with your own eyes, right? Yeah. And I say to my own family, they'll say, oh, did you know that so-and-so celebrity or whatever passed away? Well, you might want to, check that a few different sources, right? Because you just don't even know anymore, right? Yeah. Or somebody was arrested. Well, check a few sources, right? And that's going to actually be a huge challenge in the time, not just for politicians, but for everybody. How do you know what is actually true? Not just what you perceive to be right or what you perceive to be, the right direction, but there are, fundamental truths. And we're looking at things on social media and going, I can't even tell if that's true or not, right? Yeah. And that's a problem. That's a problem for society.
Yeah. Well, just a couple times I see now in winters, vehicle pile up, but
right.
I automatically now start looking for inconsistencies.
Yeah.
You can something is fixing itself automatically, in the next scene, but it's just wild.
Same thing.
Nothing you can trust.
I see. Planes crash. Well, now I'm checking different sources. Did that actually happen? Right? You don't know. But not everybody does that. Not everybody will do that. A lot of people will just simply retweet it, right? Or tell their friends and family. And actually I feel really bad for folks who are older. Now I'm getting in that generation, so I'll be careful how I say this. But I mean, I have my mom, and she's now in her 80s. Well, she'll often say, well, I was on Facebook and I saw this, right? And, well, that's not true, Mom. Well, I was on Facebook, I saw it, right? So, and that's how scams and, a lot of people getting scammed out of money, right? The ability to discern truth is going to be a challenge for this next generation.
Yeah, well, that'll be interesting to see. But I'm sure, because humans have dealt with a lot of things, I'm sure there will be a way we can figure out how to deal with this as well, right? Like the next generation, there has to be
there has to be. And I always say that because people will say, well, these are incredibly difficult times, and I think that they are. But it always feels like I think that the time that you're living in is the most difficult because it's the only time you've lived in, right? Yeah. I can imagine the people who were in the midst of World War I or World War II, or even the angst and anxiety we saw in the United States during the Vietnam War. I'm sure a lot of folks thought that those were the worst times that could ever happen too. And for those folks living through that, I'm sure that it was the worst times of their lives. So gotta have perspective too. So I raise those concerns, but I have hope for the future too.
Right, yeah. Back to the leadership years, over 20 years are representing Steinbach. What stands out to you?
Well, the change is one thing I talked a bit about earlier in the interview, right? How much Steinbach has changed since I was a child, but it's changed a lot since I got elected too. Just the growth in the community. Talk about multiculturalism. That's certainly one part of it. But just how big the community has gotten. I used to drive from my home when I used to live on Walnut Street as a kid. Well, as a kid, I was a teenager. At my age, that feels like a kid, Pedro. But I would drive from my home on Walnut Avenue to the previously spoken about Penner Foods. There was no street lights between my home and getting to the mall at Clear Spring Mall. And then all of a sudden they put a street light up at the corner. I was like, oh my goodness, I got to go through a street light. That was 5 or something, right? I mean, that's a small and inconsequential way of measuring growth, but that is part of it, right? I mean, the community has grown just incredibly significantly. What stands out is maybe highlights for me over that time. There's two aspects of it, right? There's just the representing the riding, going to the Kleefeld Honey Festival. I almost called it the Kleefeld Funny Festival. Maybe they should have a Kleefeld Funny Festival, right? Well, it should be like a comedy show.
Yeah, but it is. You never know what kind of weather you're going to get. Well, it's always funny. Last year it was rain and cold, and then the year before was 30+ degrees. So
there you go. Okay, so it wasn't just a misspeak. Going to the Kleefeld Honey Festival, or the Hanover Ag Days, Niverville Fun and Fair Days, and more recently Steinbach Summer in the city. These are great things just to go to and connect with people, and because you're an elected representative, people come and speak to you about a lot of things. And I enjoy that. If you don't like people, don't go into politics, right? Because it's not going to go well for you or anybody else. But I really, really enjoyed the interactions with people. I mean, I was geared that way. But then I look at some of the things that have happened in terms of different things we were able to do for the community in the region. More recently, highlights expansion of the personal care home in Steinbach, Rest Haven, critically needed, probably still need more space, but that was critically needed at that time. We'll soon have the expanded Bethesda Regional Health Care Center open with 3 new operating rooms, which was critically needed. We only had 1 before, and that one often shut down. And then new beds in there. New elementary school opened up in Steinbach. We've had expansions in Mitchell schools in Bloom North. Of course, the Kleefeld School was, I think, opened in 2002 or something along those range. And expansions at for dialysis, which was really important because there's people driving to Winnipeg for dialysis before we were able to get that in place as a government. And of course, the event center in Steinbach, which just opened officially this last summer. Right. And now we've had, world-class curlers come and play there and speak, glowingly about the facility. So it's good to be able to be part of. Now, I always say this to my son, I had a key role in each of those projects in government, and nobody's going to remember that except me and hopefully him, because people shouldn't. It shouldn't matter to people, right? Government does government things. Government should be responding to the needs of the community. And who is involved in getting them isn't really that important. It's just important that these things happen and they get done and they're there to serve a community. But as an elected official, you do look back and you go, well, I'm glad I was involved in that, right? So personally, I'm glad to have been involved in those things. For the community, it's just good that it's happening for the community at large. So those have been highlights. Obviously, short-term time that I was premier, it was a highlight, but it was also, I didn't do it as a highlight of a career. I was asked to do it by my colleagues because the former premier, Brian Pallister, had stepped down, and we needed somebody in the interim, right, period before we elected a new leader. So it wasn't something I did because I was trying to put it on a resume or as a capstone of a career. It was a responsibility. There was a lot of stuff going on at that time, and it wasn't just sort of, okay, we're going to, hold on to the handlebars and not make any, quick movements. There was a lot of stuff happening at that time, and it required, daily decisions that were impactful during the pandemic. So those are difficult times. We were still, at that time, we were having meetings with premiers and the Prime Minister virtually, of course, but on a quasi daily basis, right? To monitor things and see where things were going. So it was intense, and I didn't spend any time thinking about what the office meant. I just spent time thinking about what had to be done, right? And even now, I haven't really spent a lot of time looking back. I think when I'm fully out of politics, when a new person's elected in the riding, I think I'll probably spend 2 or 3 months being a little bit more reflective at that time, and I think I'll be grateful for it, but still kind of in the job now, right?
So the premier position, from deputy premier to premier, that kind of just got thrown at you, or kind of happened?
Yeah. So a lot of the, I was doing another interview with a different media a while ago, and I hadn't really thought of it this way, but they said a lot of the things that have happened in terms of your political career have happened unintentionally and kind of surprisingly and quickly. So getting elected, as I mentioned, right, not intending to do that, heading in a path towards law, all of a sudden one day everything changed. Wasn't planning to serve in a lot of the roles that I did, wasn't planning to be the premier clearly. In fact, I declined to run for the role, and then the next day I'm in the role. And so that's the nature of life, I think, sometimes, all right? I'm sure when you're talking to people now in this podcast and hearing their stories, I'm sure you hear a lot of people say, was never planning to go there, right? And whether they're from a spiritual perspective where they felt they were led somewheres or some other circumstance or a combination of both, you end up in a place that you never thought you'd be, right? And I think that's the story of a lot of people. So for me, politically, I think that was true. A lot of roles and positions and places that I never thought I'd be. Sometimes you have imposter syndrome people often talk about, where you wonder how you don't really think you deserve to be in the room. But you go there and you do the job, right? You serve the best you can.
Like one of my favorite stories is Abraham. Like he was God just told him, I want you to go start moving to a land I will show you, and he just start walking, and things happen along the way. He never
faith, right?
So, yeah, right. And that's so many, and faith is so much of it is service. Like we are made to serve as humans. Like just, and then nothing can ever us prepare for everything that happens to us. But it's just I'm amazed by, your story too. Like where exactly that. Like when you signed up for this, it wasn't a plan really, and you could have never imagined like all these things that happen along the way, right?
No, never could have imagined, never could have planned it, never could have orchestrated it, never could have designed it. From that moment, when my dad passed away, going into government housing, I mean, no 11-year-olds are thinking, well, maybe there are some thinking about being premier or prime minister anyway, but there was no path. There was no foreseeable path, right?
Yeah.
But of course there was. It just wasn't a path that I could have seen, or that I was involved in designing. I really felt a lot of that was God led, and I've said that publicly. That when I announced I was retiring, I thank God, because I don't think I could have done a lot of things without, I know I couldn't have done a lot of things without him, without guidance, without perseverance, and somebody else leading the way.
Mm. And you serve as multiple minister roles too, like health, education, and justice. Like, which one was the most fun?
I wouldn't call it the most fun. And somebody else asked me this a little while ago, and they were surprised by the answer. And they said, which is the role you like the most?
Oh, yeah.
And it's not the role that I liked the most, I would say. It's the role I was most glad that I served in, and that is the Department of Health. And people are always surprised by that, because it's such a hard role, right? But that's actually why I'm so glad that I was able to serve in it. Health is, in any provincial government, it's about half of the budget, maybe 45% of the budget. So it's most of the labor issues that of any part of government. You're dealing with big unions, important unions, right? Manitoba Nurses Union, College of Physicians and Surgeons. I mean, they're critically important to the province and to people's health. You're dealing with a lot of political, unfortunately, a lot of politics around health, but there is, right? And it's most of the question, or times in question period, I would have every question was a health question. And that's not uncommon in provincial legislatures, because it's such a dominant part of what happens in provincial politics. So it's incredibly stressful. It's incredibly rewarding. It's incredibly engaging. It is 16 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week. There's never a day when you're not dealing with some issue that's come up. There's endless amount of meetings. There's endless amount of people who want to get your ear. And ultimately, you get burned out by it. I think when I left health, I'd served close to 3 years, and I was the longest serving health minister in Canada at that time. I mean, because there's just a lot of, you can only do it for so and so long, right?
So much stress.
And you compare it to other departments. So there were departments, I remember the Department of Culture, I would say to the minister, who I was quite fond of, but I'd say, that by the time you come to the legislature at 9:30 a.m., I've spent your entire yearly budget in the Department of Health, because it's just such a difference, right? I mean, health is 45% of the provincial budget. So there's so much onus placed on everything in health. The government, whatever its mandates are, don't get met if the Department of Health doesn't meet those mandates. So I'm glad I served in it. There are amazing people in there, deputy ministers, assistant deputy ministers, people throughout the healthcare system, incredibly dedicated, really caring people. So I loved all the departments I worked with. I was blessed with great civil servants to work with. But I'm most glad that I got to serve as the health minister, and I probably wouldn't have said that 5 years ago, but looking back, that's how I feel.
What, if you had to think back, what would be the hardest decision that you had to make?
There's two kinds of decisions that happen, I think, in a government. And most governments, it's interesting if you look historically, most governments run on a platform, right? Any federally, provincially, they'll run on a platform, whether it's a 5-point plan or a great big list of ideas and plans. But more often than not, those governments in history aren't judged based on those plans. They're judged on things that they didn't foresee coming and how they dealt with them. Unforeseen, whether those are wars or natural disasters or whatever, right? So you recognize very quickly in government that there's a lot of things you didn't plan for that you now have to make decisions on. One of the earliest ones, and that was actually quite complicated at the time for us, was the Trudeau government legalized marijuana. And it was relatively easy from a legal perspective for the federal Trudeau government to say we're going to legalize marijuana, but they left it up to the provinces to determine, well, how is it going to be sold and regulated and what ages, and they basically said we're legalizing it, now you do all the work. Like, it was incredibly complex. So we made the decision as a government to put the age of marijuana consumption at 19 years old, as opposed to the age of alcohol consumption, which is 18 years old, so we went 1 year higher. Not every province did that. We thought that was important. I think that that's still the case. We put restrictions on home growing of plants. We decided that there would be more of a private network for retail, but government would control, the supply of marijuana. And now looking back, people, might not have realized how complex it was, but it was incredibly complex. But we didn't run on that. Like, we didn't run in 2016 on what are we going to do about legalizing marijuana, because we know it's coming. So that was a really, really complex file. And then, of course, the pandemic happened, right? And there'll be 10,000 emotions about the pandemic, and nobody wants to talk about it again and relive any of that. And that's probably for a lot of good reasons. It was hurtful for a lot of people in society, and still is, I think, when some people talk about it. But there was difficult decisions every day there. And there was a decision where people didn't agree. And that's one of the things I think was too bad, is that government decides things in cabinet, right? And this is how our Westminster model of parliament works. Cabinet ministers get together with the premier or the prime minister federally. They make decisions. They debate those decisions. There's lots of different opinions sometimes on decisions. Sometimes everybody agrees on decision. But then you go out, and whether you agreed or disagreed, that's the position of the government then, right? The government has that position. And there's reasons for that, because if that wasn't happening, governments would be falling every other day, right? And you'd be having elections every week, and people wouldn't like that either. But during COVID, I think the downside of that was that people would see everybody come out of cabinet with, there was a unified government position. But there's lots of disagreement about how things were, different, whether there were restrictions or other things that were happening. But people couldn't see that because they're not in cabinet. And because they couldn't see it, I think it led a lot of people to make their own assumptions about what was happening, right? And some of those assumptions were not just wrong, but I mean, they're challenging, right, in terms of institutions as a whole. And I don't know how you change that. I don't know how you open up the doors a little bit so people, or maybe we should have been more forthcoming to say, look, there's a lot of different opinions here. We're not going to get everything right. We didn't get everything right. And there's a lot of different people who have a lot of different views. And those, just like you might be arguing in your kitchen table about it, because families disagreed on this too. So is government. But ultimately, government has to make a decision, right? But it may have given people more comfort to know that there wasn't like a unified position or everybody felt exactly the same, or everybody was trying to, in government trying to do something or not do something. There was a lot of arguments and disagreements within that. That might have actually, in that situation, given people a bit more comfort. So obviously, that was a difficult time that nobody wants to go back to and nobody wants to relive. And I pray almost daily that nobody has to live through that again or anything like that again. But stuff happens in our world, and other challenges are going to happen. There probably won't be pandemics, but they're going to be difficult for elected leaders and for society to have to deal with. So hopefully some lessons were learned. And so those are decisions that, again, you weren't expecting when you come into government. They're put upon you, right? That often define you. But then there are decisions that you were expecting. How are you going to deal with healthcare? How are you going to, try to reduce wait times? Those are things governments do run on, and you do try to put in policies and positions in there, and they're never easy because there's always different interests that are involved, right? There's different perspectives, and everybody feels that theirs is right, and to do anything other than what their perspective is can doom the system, whether it's justice, healthcare, education, or whatever. So those challenges exist every day, but I always felt blessed to be able to be in a place where I could influence those decisions, because that's what you want. You want to be there to try to influence decisions. You don't want to win every one. There's a lot of things I didn't win in terms of my opinion in government, and there's a lot of things I did. But that's part of it. You want to be at the table, right, where you can try to influence those decisions. And for those 8 years, I was able to. And then when you're not in government, you try to influence decisions other ways, right? So it's been a blessing to be able to do it. I always felt, even in the hardest day, and there were lots of days that you didn't sort of think would continue to do this. Always felt, going back to those early days, we were called to do it, and so if he led you to it, he'll help lead you through it. And he did.
Well, in that sense, there's no way of satisfying everybody, right? You're going to disappoint. It's like almost like no matter what decision one would take, you will disappoint somebody, and almost not just COVID related, but I guess healthcare and other things.
There always is. The best case scenario, on your best day, if you make a decision and 80% of the people agree with you, that's probably as good as you're going to get, right? So that's still 20% who's disagreeing with you. And over time, that just adds up, right? Even if you're making very popular decisions where 80%, which almost never happens, where 80% of the people agree with you, over time, that 20%, it adds and adds and adds, right? And that's what weighs governments down over time.
So back to Steinbach and community. You've been part of Steinbach Arts Council, Southeast Helping Hands, and Food Bank. Well, what's that been like? Like, what does that mean to you? So, I mean, those were obviously before I was elected, because it's difficult to be in those positions when you're an elected official. But soon I won't be an elected official. Maybe I'll return to some of those community services. So they were all for different reasons, right? All the groups that I've been involved with were for different reasons. The food bank, as I mentioned early on, was one of the founding members of the Steinbach Food Bank. And that was because I recognized from my own youth that sometimes people get into situations that are difficult financially and otherwise that are not of their own making. And even if they are of their own making, they still need support. And that's important that there's a community there to support. Now, I remember those early days of the food bank, our mentality always was, well, hopefully someday we'll put ourselves out of business, right? And the people won't need that support. The reality in society is that doesn't seem to be anywhere close to happening. So the need for the food bank has only grown over the years. But I really joined that because it felt like a way to give back into a community where when I needed support, we were able to find support. The Arts Council has some friends who are serving on the Arts Council, and I think it's an important. Our Arts Council is actually really sort of not misunderstood, but not maybe well appreciated how big it is, and how compared to other rural arts councils, how much programming goes on at the Arts Council. It's tremendous in terms of the daily programming that happens. Sometimes people go to the concerts or, the annual Christmas show at the WSO, and that's kind of how their touch point. But on a daily basis, there's a tremendous amount of programming that's going on there. David Clausen is the lead of that now. Before that, it was Cindy Rempel-Patrick, and just a legacy of reaching out into the community. And of course, with that diversity that I've talked about in the community, that's also diversified the arts and, what's kind of being shown and the different sort of some mediums that are available at the Arts Council. So I think that our Arts Council is maybe underappreciated sometimes in terms of its value to the community. And if we talk about what Steinbach probably needs more of, one of the things I think we probably need is a performing arts center. And so that'll be a challenge for another elected representative, but I think that's something we need to look at, a place where a community has to be more than a place than where people go to, eat and sleep and to work, right? You connect into a community in a lot of different ways, and the value of a community is seen in a lot of different ways. So that was part of my being involved in the Arts Council. I was involved with the Rotary Club for a number of years. In fact, they made me an honorary Rotarian for the Southeast Rotary Club. Just as a way to give back. There's good women and men there who are raising money to help within our community. Just one of the sort of groups and organizations that does that. So I was pleased to be part of their organization for a number of years. And then, people might be surprised to know that I maintain a membership in the Legion, not because I'm in the military, but because I appreciate the fact we live in a free and democratic society, and that $45 a year that I have to pay is worth it to demonstrate that I appreciate those who many of them aren't here anymore, but who made that sacrifice so we could live in the community. So giving back into a community, you want to do it wherever you can. Some people have different abilities or either more financial means or more time, but I think everybody should try to give a little bit back where they can. Yeah, I was going to ask you what Steinbach needs going forward might be on the hands of the next MLA, but you already said.
Well, that would be one thing. Yeah, there will be other things too. They certainly need water and sewer infrastructure because the community is going to continue to grow, and we've seen that here in Hanover too. And and I hope that the province is quick to support that, because that's ultimately it pays for itself, right? That development and the growth of a community, the province makes money by that happening in the long run, because people are building houses, they're paying taxes, they're living in the community, they're living in the province. But it can't all just be about water and sewer. And so, there's a staging to these things, Pedro. And when I became Minister of Health, there was lots of people who were talking about the need for a new event center at that time. And I said, I agree with you. Steinbach and the region needs a new event center, but we first need to get new personal care home beds, because there were so many people who were leaving our community who'd lived and contributed to the community for decades, and then they're going 2 or 3 hours away in some cases, and having to live their final years far away from the community. So I said, I appreciate the fact that we absolutely need that we need an event center, and yes, we need other things like dialysis in schools, but I need to prioritize getting the personal care home expanded. We did, and then we moved on to other things, and ultimately, the school and the event center and other things happen, right? But there is a priority to things. So when I look at it, we probably first need the water and sewer treatment. That's number one. Because you don't grow without that, right? So Steinbach in the region has to ensure that there's room to grow. In terms of, softer infrastructure that aren't just intersections and highways, which are important. But yeah, I do think a community arts or a community cultural performance center is important, cultural arts center. I think it's important for the community to sort of continue to come together. We see the value, I think, of the event center and people sort of coming together. Yeah. There, and there'll be need for a new high school, a new regional school, believe it or not, in Steinbach. I mean, that was just expanded 10 years ago or so. It was when I went there, the SRSS, it was just the old building, right? And then the big addition came, and there's actually a need for another one, right? Whether that's in addition to that or a separate, tech school, I don't know, but there is definitely a need for that too. So there's lots of needs. And I'm sure the next MLA is going to get them all done.
He will have his hands full. He or she, whoever.
He or she will have his hands full. So
yeah. Okay, back to faith and values. How did your faith? I mean, I think you talked on this a little bit already. How did your faith shape the approach that you took on?
So I think people go into politics who have a faith perspective. A lot of people do, thinking that it's all going to be about issues. Votes on contentious matters, standing in the legislature or in parliament and speaking about your faith, and all of those things are important, don't get me wrong. I think we missed the plot a little bit personally. I think as people of faith who are entering politics, because to me, the greatest thing that we're missing in politics is character, and the character that you bring into now, everybody who goes into the legislature has some sort of value. So I kind of dismiss people who say, oh, well, you're a Christian and, you shouldn't bring your values into the legislature. Everybody comes to the legislature with values. Yeah. Whether they're faith values or other values, you're shaped by your experiences, the things that have happened in your life. You bring those values into the legislature and into parliament. And that's important. Like, I don't want people there who have no values. There's people there who've had experiences that are very different than mine, who've grown up in communities that are very different than the communities I've grown up. I want to hear those experiences, and the values that they bring from those experiences are incredibly important. My values have importance too. Now that's different than, because sometimes folks say, well, Christians are trying to run the government. I actually don't know. I don't know of a lot of people of faith that I interact with who believe that it should be run by the church. The government should be run by the church. What most people say to me is that they want to ensure that their views are respected and that they're heard, and that they have an ability to voice those into government. Not that they're expecting to run the government. We have separation of church and state. It's more of an American concept that sometimes is misunderstood. It's more about protecting faith from government than protecting government from faith. But nobody's expecting that the government's going to be run by a church or any other sort of religious institution. But men and women of faith, of a variety of faiths, absolutely should be able to express their own values. They should be, and people who have values should be able to come to the government and express those, not with the expectations that those decisions that they're looking for are always going to go their way. That doesn't happen for anybody. But we're too quick to dismiss people of faith, and to not and say, well, you can't speak about your position because you come from a faith perspective. That's not what our country was founded on. So when I talk to people of faith, they basically are saying to me, listen, like we want to have we want to be able to heard respectfully. We want to have our views heard respectfully. But going back to your question, and this is a long way to get there, I think people who enter faith or enter politics who have a faith perspective, it's character, because if you don't look any different than anybody else, if I go out there and say, okay, I have a Christian faith, and I've said that, I've never hidden that in my political life. Right from the beginning, I said I have a Christian faith perspective. Never been shy about that. But if you don't act any differently than anybody else, well, what is that? Like, what does your faith or your character actually do? So what I've tried to do over my political career, not perfectly, I've failed at this many times, is to engage respectfully with people of different views, to sit down and have conversations with them, even when they're completely different than the views or positions that I've had, whether they're faith views or just policy views, to not attack people personally on policy, have those differences, and be strong-willed about those differences. That's good. That's what it's for. But not personally attack people. To reach out when you think it's appropriate that people are hurting in some way, and we all hurt, right? Yeah. We all have issues in our lives, and to reach across out and to show that. So one of the things that I'm actually quite proud about is that when I announced that I was retiring, and the mainstream media, Free Press and others, started to run stories, you never know how that's going to go. I've been there 23 years. I'm sure they could find negative things to write if they really wanted to. But one of the things a lot of them wrote was that I demonstrated an ability to reach across the aisle, and that I would work with other parties. And in fact, some of the other political parties came out and said that. Jennifer Howard from the NDP, who used to be their finance minister, came and said, I really respected Kelvin because we could work through issues. And that was important to me, because you want to demonstrate a character that's different, so that people will go, there's something different about, and that's what we're called to do as Christians, right? We're supposed to be light. And so when people look at us, they're supposed to go, there's something different in a positive way. Yeah. What's different, right? About what do they have that I don't have? That's the question people should be left asking, and often they don't. So if you go into politics from a faith perspective and you just think it's going to be about contentious issues or those sort of things, to me, those aren't unimportant, but to me, it's actually not the most important. I think the character you demonstrate is you're representing your faith.
To show a good character.
To show good character.
And just standing there and yelling. I mean, I guess any level of politics, different. If you look at history, they've tried that, right? Like you tried to force your views on other people, that never worked well.
Doesn't work. And one of the pastors I'm friends with said to me, and he probably read it somewhere too, but he said one of the greatest humilities of Jesus Christ was that he left his reputation in the hands of his followers. And he left it to us to uphold his reputation. When you actually think about it that way, that's a tremendous responsibility, right? And that Christ said, I'm going to leave my reputation in the hands of others, and I hope that, that they demonstrate, because we're supposed to lead a Christ-like life, that they demonstrate that faith. I have failed in that many times, but I've been challenged to try as much as I could to show something different. And so folks who go into politics from a faith perspective, that's a challenge, but a challenge that's worth taking on.
When I was a child, somebody once told me the falling down is not the issue; it's the staying down or getting up.
Yeah.
The difference of that's right. Like we fail in different levels, and that's not the main issue. The main issue is what you do after, right? And
you have to acknowledge it. Like I remember going to an NDP cabinet minister after a question period where I don't think I was as gracious as I should have been. And I said to her, I just want to apologize. Like, I think I went too far, and I'm sorry. And in fact, she mentioned that to me, this was like more than a decade ago. but she's not in politics anymore. But I ran into her and she said, "Remember when you came up and you apologized to me?" I said, "Yeah, I do." And I still kind of feel bad about it. So thanks for reminding me. She said, "No, I really appreciated you saying that though, because we don't do that enough, right?" But that to me again is demonstrating character.
Well, fighting makes good TV, right?
It does, unfortunately.
And then that text, like you said earlier, it just got much worse. Another question in regards to faith: have you ever felt like that there was an area where politics and faith conflict with each other?
Oh, often. And I mean, some of it is issues, right? Where you have a particular faith perspective and it's conflicting with an issue. Those actually come up less often than people think, right? I mean, they draw a lot of attention, but you're dealing with in the legislature or in parliament, you're dealing with, hundreds of issues a year that really aren't faith perspectives. Like where a highway gets built or, how that hospital is going to be designed isn't really a perspective of faith. And that's largely what you're dealing with in government is a lot of administrative issues. Where I always felt the conflict was a lot about what we were talking about is that you're going into a place like question period. And question period is not just a shootout, it's like an ambush, right? Like and I was a minister where people would kind of come and try to ambush me, and I was a critic for a number of years where your goal is to try to ambush them. And it's a very different perspective than what we're taught from I'm assuming, similar experience that you've had from a faith perspective, right? Like in most churches that I've been involved with, they say, okay, if you have a problem with somebody, you should first go to them and try to work it out, to say to them, hey, let's talk about this, right?
Right.
And if it can't be resolved, then maybe you go to an elder or a trusted person in the church, and you try to work it out collectively together that way, right? And that's how you resolve conflict. That is entirely different than question period. Like there's none of that happening in question period. So that was really, that's the daily conflict, right? Like how do you exist in an environment like that as a person from a faith perspective? Do your job effectively, because there is a democratic part to this, and you have to be a part of democratic accountability and responsibility. That's important from a perspective of freedom, which also includes freedom of religion. So you got to play that role. You got to do it well. But how do you do that in a way that isn't inconsistent with your faith perspective? And to me, that's been the biggest challenge, right, on a day-to-day basis. So I would often use humor as part of that. Sometimes self-deprivating humor, right? That's the best humor because it offends nobody but yourself. To try to demonstrate some of that. It's a little disarming, right? And I think my colleagues and others who served with me on the other side would acknowledge that. That was one way of dealing with it, right? To try to detoxify and take off some of the steam and pressure that exists in that environment. But as a person of faith, it's a very different environment than we're expected to culture in almost any other environment.
Okay. So stepping back, why now? I guess that's a big question. A lot of people probably have asked that already. But
And it's actually been really strange to me because I've served now, Pedro, for it'll be 23 years this year in summer. If Mr. Canoe holds to the election date, I'll serve for 24 and a half years almost, by the time he calls the next election. I mean, if you murder somebody in this country, you get 25 years. So it feels like 24 years you should be able to get out of the legislature, right? But I've had a number of people come to me and they say, so why are you leaving? And then they speculate on a bunch of things. And I go, well, I've been there 23 years. Like, how long do you think I should be there? Like 30 or 35? And then people sort of go, oh yeah, I guess it's been really a long time, right? So it isn't anything in particular. I have a great relationship with the leader of our party. We're great friends, and it's actually hard for me one of the reasons it was hard to step away is because we are such good friends. But I also know that this is a job that your heart has to be in it 100%. It can't be in it 80% or 85%. It has to be in it 100% because it does really demand that of you if you're going to do the job well. And in talking to my wife and had this sort of reflection moment leading up to the holidays, we both love it, and we both love the people, and we both love the opportunities to interact with people. But I don't know that we both had 100% into it anymore. And so could I have continued to do the job? Sure, I could probably do it in my sleep. I've done it for so long, right? I know the mechanisms and the machinations of it, but I wouldn't have been doing it justice. And it's important to let somebody else come in who's got 100% heart invested into this and do the job well. So, and it's nice to leave on your own terms, right? I'm not getting unelected. There's no controversy surrounding us right now. We're not in the middle of COVID. I can just leave on my own terms, which is not very few politicians get to do that. So I feel very blessed to be able to.
I guess that's a nice way to leave something like that, or like any jobs that I say, like if you get to leave on your own terms and good terms, why not, right? Like that's the best way.
And you know what? Most people actually, even after 23 years, let me tell you, Pedro, I got some, my son and I once did this dramatic reading of nasty emails.
Oh.
I think we called it reading mean tweets. There was, I've gotten a few of those, don't get me wrong, but 95% of what I've gotten are people just saying, thank you for your service, we're sorry you're leaving, we wish you to stay longer. That's great. Like that's an amazing thing to be able to leave that way, right? Where it's not like people are saying, thank goodness you're leaving. Now maybe they're all saying that, not telling me, but most of the comments, by far the vast majority, have been really, really positive. So it's a good way to go.
Excellent. In a sense, I mean, you mentioned some of that earlier. What are you most proud of?
Sometimes people ask about that, right? Like, so I mentioned the projects and that in terms of that. But people will say, I was asked this by a reporter, actually when I was finishing my term as premier, they were saying, well, what do you want your legacy to be, right? That kind of thing. And I'm like, I never think about it that way, right? Like I kind of went into politics thinking, we're called to serve. I feel called to serve. I want to do it as well as I can. And I want to be able to leave with my family as strong as when I went into it, which sadly doesn't always happen. Politics is tough. If there are challenges, it exacerbates those challenges in a family relationship. Yeah. If there are already cracks, it wenches into those cracks and rips them open because the time commitment is significant. The pressure is significant at times. Sometimes it's almost overwhelming depending what situation you're going through. And I would acknowledge that COVID was one of those times where I worried about sort of the mental health of my family, right? Mm-hmm. More than anything. But I really just wanted to, do the best that I could, serve in a way that demonstrated character, and then leave with my family as strong as we went into it. Of course, we had our son Malachi along the way. So that to me is all I wanted, and that has been accomplished. So the rest it's up for other people to decide, right? Like you don't in politics really get to write your own legacy. Others will decide that, and that's fine. Like people can judge my service in whatever way they want. They did when I was elected, or they still do. I'm still elected, but that's part of what you sign up for in elected life. Is others will judge you, good or bad. And that's fine. So folks will look back on whatever role I had in provincial politics and make their own decisions, and that's totally fine. I'm comfortable knowing that did the best that I could, made mistakes, did some good stuff too, but most importantly, my family and I are strong together and grateful for the time we've had.
Excellent. So what's next? I'm sure you haven't heard this question before.
All the time, like and I say to people like I'm not like.
Are you becoming a pilot?
Should, right? Can you imagine anybody wanting to? People would like get on the plane, look and go, "Is that Kelvin Goertzen?" And turn around and get right off the plane. There's no way they would trust me, or should they?
I did a shortcut course on it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Expedited.
So I've just finished doing some writing for a university in Canada, for one of the law schools. It'll get published as part of a book this summer. I enjoyed that. It's academic writing, and I haven't done that for a while. I mean, most of the writing I've done, of course, in the last 20 years has been sort of political writing, but academic writing is a different sort of thing. But I enjoyed that exercise, and I love the law, right? So it's nice to sort of have that opportunity to do that. I've done a few other things, even more recently on media training for organizations, kind of quietly and privately for them. So I've been asked to do those sort of things. In the future, been a couple of other organizations that have reached out. I think my answer is the same. I don't really know what I want to do. I want to take I don't want to rush into anything, And some of this is those who are believers who are listening to the podcast will understand this. Sometimes as believers, we want God to lead us into what he wants us to be in, what the plan is. But we fill it up so fast that there's no room for that.
Right.
And I don't want to do that, right? So while there are certain things that I have an interest in and certain things that have been approached to me about things that would be interesting to me, I want to give space and time, right, to make sure that what I'm doing, I feel led to do in the same way that I got led into this, right? I don't, expect it to be elected life again, but not full time. But I don't know. Like I want to give that space, right? I don't want to fill it in with all of my own ideas so fast that that the guidance that I've often relied on in the past has no ability to provide any.
Be still and know.
Yeah, be still, and so my desire, because it's my nature, is to go and never stop.
Right.
But sometimes stopping is okay too. So I think I'm holding things pretty loosely right now.
That's okay too.
But plus, by the way, Pedro, like at some point I got to retire, right? I mean, I don't think it's a crime. Like, we want to do stuff, right?
Yeah.
But there is also a time when
I always joke I never want to retire. Like
I hear
want
that from a
to
lot of people. Yeah.
move to something else. They
Yeah.
say the day you retire, I wouldn't. That's paraphrasing. The day you retire, just when you die. So they say you need a purpose in a way.
And I think that's different, right? Purpose and retiring, because we associate retiring as working for income, right?
Yeah.
Which isn't always the same thing as purpose. So I think that people need to have a purpose and to drive towards that purpose for as long as they physically and mentally are able to do that. So I want purpose for sure. Like I think all of us do. Whether that looks like full-time employment or not isn't really my biggest concern. My biggest concern is that the purpose is doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Excellent. Well, I was listening to besides the point, I was listening to a podcast not too long ago that was talking about his friend who sold his business, made a lot of money, retired, and went onto a boat and was fishing all day. And after 2 or 3 weeks, he was tired of fishing, so he went and bought another business, and he just did a business for fun, right? Like,
yeah.
That's kind of, I guess, my point. What I was trying to make earlier about retirement, right?
Yeah. No, I don't plan to retire in that way.
I know. It's just
First of all, I don't look that great on a beach, so that's number one. I don't really like fishing that much. I've done it once in a while, but so yeah.
Yeah. All right. So what do you do for fun and hobbies?
So fun and hobbies. You'll be surprised to know I listen to a lot of political podcasts.
Oh, nice.
So maybe I'll let go a little bit of that. My wife and I love the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. This is well documented that during my relatively short time as Premier, the Bombers were undefeated. They were almost undefeated that year, by the way. So we love going to Bomber games. I love going to Jets games. She's not as big a hockey fan as she is a football fan, but we sort of go to that as well. We actually have gotten into going to a lot of plays. We like dramas, so we go to the Manitoba Theatre Centre, and that's been sort of a new sort of passion for us that we enjoy doing. We both like listening to audiobooks, and so I think we both do a lot of that as well. We try to walk and bike around town when the weather permits, and it certainly hasn't in the last couple of weeks, although we go to the walking track at the event center now, so that sometimes is a bit of a substitute. We follow what our son is doing. He was in Israel last summer, and he'll probably find his way back there again sometime soon. So as parents, you sort of get a little engaged in your own kids' life, even though if you're not actively doing stuff with them, you're engaged with them, right? In terms of what they're doing. So those things keep us busy enough. My mom is still in Steinbach. She's a bit older now, and so I spend time with her as well. I'm glad to actually have that time to be able to spend with her. So lots of things to keep us busy. I never seem to find that I'm lacking for things to do. But those are the fun things and the enjoyable things that we do. And I suspect that as time goes along, there'll be other things. My wife has decided that she wants to fulfill the lifelong dream of going to Italy, so we're going to do that in the fall.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, and so we've got that planned, and got a few other things planned too.
Nice. So during your political years, how did you, in the craziness of how did you find ways to recharge?
Often not well, but one of the things that I did, and I say this to new politicians as well, who particularly have kids, is I would take my son and my wife, at my expense, to be clear, to things that were unusual. So when I was health minister, we had the opioids summit. There's an opioids crisis in Canada. And drug overdoses. And I said to my son Malachi, you want to come with me to Ottawa to the opioids conference? He was like 11 years old. And now it's not because I was worried about him being on opiates. Let's be clear about that, Pedro. But he came with me. He came with me once to Washington and was in the embassy. We were getting a briefing on what became the Kuzma deal, which is now hotly debated these days. My wife and him came to the Minister of Justice's meeting. They sort of got to know a lot of the ministers from across Canada, and I was one of the few ministers who, no, they didn't come and sit in all the meetings, right? They would go off and do other things sometimes. But I often got questions like, you brought your family, that's interesting. And I go, but that was one of the things I mentioned that I wanted to leave with my family as strong as when I went into politics. I say to new politicians, you're going to give up a lot as a politician because you're going to give up a lot of time. And that's just the reality. You can't get around it. If you're looking for work-life balance, you picked the wrong occupation. Like, I actually went to a seminar once that was about work-life balance in politics. And it was the shortest seminar ever because the person who was leading it said, who here wants work-life balance? And all the politicians put up their hand and she said, well, you're in the wrong business. Go find another occupation. It really isn't. It's not achievable other than you have to make special efforts. So I would bring them along to things that I could bring them along to. They were sometimes unusual because it was still time together, right? And it's a strategy, but it's one that I would say to new politicians, do it. It's going to cost you a bit of money because you got to pay for the flights and you got to pay for all that kind of stuff, and that's fine. But it gives them unique experiences they wouldn't otherwise have. Is that an exact trade-off for the fact that you're going to be gone a lot more than maybe in other occupations? No, but it's something, and it's important, and it develops them too. I can see that in my son now, right, who has a real interest in world affairs. That a lot of the things that I brought him to, I didn't see it at the time, but now I can see that it had an impact on him, right? So, it's something. It doesn't achieve. It helps in terms of keeping de-stressed in these sort of environments. But it's not perfect. And then, of course, the other thing is perspective, right? I mean, a lot of times you're just working 18-hour days. You don't think you're getting anywhere. You're grinding through issues. You're not seeing things change. You wonder what's going to move the needle or when things are going to get better on whatever the file is that you're dealing with. But having a faith perspective does help, right? You know that there are things that are bigger than you, and that you don't have to be responsible for everything. And that perspective helped me for sure.
That's very interesting. What advice would you have for whoever takes your seat next?
Boy, should I be? I haven't been asked this question yet because it's still an open nomination and there's an election that's going on. So I guess I'll have an opportunity, whoever wins the nomination, to try to give them advice. My advice, I think, would be to whoever takes the role next, and it would be the same to every person coming into politics, is be authentic. I get frustrated when I see really skilled politicians who I know have a passion for a particular issue or a certain knowledge about things, and they're reading off of speaking points that somebody's given to them, maybe a political staff or whatever. No offense to political staffers, because I was a political staffer one time too. But they're reading these speaking points and they're saying things they don't necessarily quite believe, or that if they said it in a different way, it would show that they had passion for the issue. And it frustrates the public. The public sits there and listens to sometimes politicians and they're going, I don't think he believes what he's saying, or she doesn't believe what she's saying. Because they're reading things that either don't sound like them or they're too torqued up, right? and don't sound genuine. So I never use speaking points, or I do my own speeches. Usually in the legislature, I would just speak got me in trouble sometimes. So, okay, there's that element of it. But more often than not, people would say, you know what, like, I don't know if I entirely agree with you, but I can tell, you really believe in that. Like, and that's good. And people give you credit for that, right? They go like, there's a lot of people would say, I do agree with you, but a lot of times they'd say, I never really got that perspective, but I can tell you really care about that, and that means something, right? And we don't do enough of that as politicians. Like, we need to be authentic. We're so scared of getting caught up in the Twitter thing or getting caught on a gotcha moment, and those things happen, and they're going to happen to whoever gets elected next. You can't speak for a living and not get into trouble sometimes with your words. That's just the reality. If you're talking all the time, you're going to sometimes say things that aren't well thought out, or you're tired or whatever. But it's still better to be authentic, I think, and people will give you a lot of credit for that. So I would say to whoever my successor is, be your own person. Don't be afraid to say no sometimes to a political party that's telling you should say something, but you don't quite believe it. And speak from your heart and how you feel about things. You're still in a political party, so you're on a team. You're gonna have to act in this. You're gonna have to bring forward the broad perspective of the team. But there are ways you can do that your own way that aren't offside with the team. They just sound a little different, but if they sound more authentic, I think it's beneficial to the team too.
Excellent. Well, there's some things out of that. Even from my person, I'm like, I'm going to remember that. I need to remember that. That's good advice. Anything else you want to add?
No, this is great. I'll give you a lot of credit for taking this on. I don't think we have enough conversations in the world, so I don't think you're getting rich doing this. I'm not getting rich by participating in it. Well, but I think it's really good that that individual people say, hey, let's just have a rational and reasonable conversation. Let's hear about people's stories. There's just not enough of that happening these days, right? In our 30-second sound bites and how do we attack somebody in 30 seconds, we've lost a lot of that. Let's sit down and talk to people, right? That's one of the greatest things, talk about loneliness in the world. We've never been more connected as a world, and yet people have never felt more lonely. And what does that mean? Because the connection isn't real, right? Like it isn't this kind of connection. So thanks for doing that. Thank you to you.
Thank you for being on. So if people want to follow your work, are you going to maintain an online platform, or if somebody's interested?
So I'm on Facebook. I think it's like Honorable Kelvin Goertzen or something. It's my MLA account. I have a personal account too on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. I have a website, but it's not terribly updated. So social media platforms are updated pretty regularly.
Okay.
I'm on Twitter too. Don't do as much on Twitter for some of the reasons we were talking about before as I used to, but certainly more active on Facebook, Instagram, and on LinkedIn.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being on. And also thank you very much for your service over the years for the community.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.